Right, so I set the meeting to record, and I will be shutting off the recording before the question and answer session, so people can feel comfortable sharing when they ask their questions. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the Chris Walsh Center for Families and Educators for this panel presentation, Understanding the Transition Process. My name is Ellen Rose. I am the graduate assistant at the Chris Walsh Center. I'm a student in the Master's of Counseling program at Framingham State University and the parent of 2 adult children with disabilities. The mission of the Chris Walsh Center is to provide information for families and educators about the continuum of educational support available to students with disabilities, students who are gifted, and students with unmet needs. The center will offer support, workshops, and other programming for families, educators, student support professionals, administrators, and advocates in the Metro West area. The center also will engage in scholarly research, educator preparation, and professional development. We will be recording tonight's presentation, but we will turn off the recording before the question and answer session. Before we get started, I would like to introduce the coordinator of the Chris Walsh Center, Dr. Therese Autumn Roberts.
Therese, you're muted.
Sorry, I must have muted myself. So my name is Therese, as Ellen said. I'm the coordinator of the Chris Walsh Center, and I wanted to first thank all the speakers for joining us tonight. They've been amazing behind the scenes helping us put this presentation together. And also I want to thank you guys that are attending the session, the community members who've asked for this topic to be discussed, because we pick topics based on your needs. So when we'll be sending a post survey out after today's event. Filling out those surveys will help us design programming in the future. So we really appreciate it. And I want to turn it back over to Ellen.
Thank you, Therese. On behalf of the Chris Walsh Center, I want to thank all 4 of tonight's speakers for volunteering their time to share their experience and expertise on the transition process. We will have time after all 4 presentations are done for a question and answer session. Please type any questions you have into the chat. I will read the questions from the chat during the question and answer session at the end. If you would like your question answered by a specific panelist, please put that in the chat. Our first speaker is Amanda Green. She is the Secondary Transition Supervisor at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Amanda, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my screen. Can you? You can see it?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm very happy to be here this evening. I'm impressed by the number of people who want to come out and learn about transitions. So that's really great. I'm not only someone who works at DESE, I'm also the parent of a 31-year-old with autism and intellectual disabilities. So this is not just my career, it's my life. So I'm so glad that so many parents are joining us this evening. I will indeed be giving you a very brief overview of secondary transition because it's a large topic and I can only do so much in a limited time. But I encourage you to keep learning, and hopefully this will be a good start for you if this is just the beginning of your journey. I want to start with a concept that was I learned about from Dr. Michael Waymeyer, who is a national expert in promoting student self-determination. I think this quote from him really frames well what we want to do in secondary transition and, in fact, in education overall. So he says that disability exists only in the gap between the individual's personal competence and the demands of the environment. If we can close that gap, disability becomes irrelevant. All of us can imagine, not just imagine, all of us probably know adults with disabilities who do well in their adult life. They've learned to navigate their lives because they have the skills, the competencies that they need in order to lead successful lives. So what we want for our young people is we want to help them know themselves now, and we want to help them build skills right now, so that in a stepwise way, year by year, we can help them grow those skills so that by the time they reach adult life, they are adapted to the adult lives that they want to lead. So disability, according to Dr. Waymeyer, and this way of thinking about it, is environment dependent, right? So if someone is being successful in their environment, disability for them is, as he says, irrelevant or hopefully irrelevant. So that's a useful framing as we think about transition. I hope you'll keep that in mind. As I said, this is a brief presentation. Here's some wonderful resources for you developed by the Federation for Children with Special Needs in partnership with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. These are brochures on a variety of topics. Just click the link. They're there in 6 languages. As you probably know, special education comes from, is informed by and runs because of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the federal law. This is language from that law defining what secondary transition is. It says that it's a coordinated set of activities. So not last minute, not disorganized, not, oh my goodness, I forgot, but a coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability that's designed to be results oriented. We want to see that student having a successful adult life. And it's focused on both academic, so reading, writing, arithmetic, and also functional achievement. So independent living, transportation, healthcare needs, employment. So how is the student doing functionally? What skills do they have now? What skills do they need to develop academically and functionally in order to facilitate the student's transition into adult life? That's what transition is in IDEA. The coordinated set of activities that is transition needs to be based on the individual student's needs, taking into consideration the student's strengths, preferences, and interests. This is so important that it's a student-driven process. During your child's education so far, I'm sure that a lot of you have been working very hard, of course, to support your children. This process is one in which gradually your child takes more of the lead so that the student develops their self-determination, self-advocacy skills. And the secondary transition process seeks to take into account your child's needs, strengths, preferences, and interests. So there's a shift in focus. If you have been in the special education game for a long time, and I certainly was with my son, you may feel that you know the IEP and special ed pretty well. What happens at 14, though, is a shift in thinking. So special education is, the purpose of it is to provide access to the general curriculum and the life of the school for students before age 14. And at 14, that is still true. But now, another point of special education is to improve the student's academic and functional achievement, to prepare the student for the 4 transition domains, as we call them: post-secondary education and training, competitive employment, independent living, and community participation. In Massachusetts, we have a visual model that we use to help us think about transition. It's a student-driven secondary transition model. If you click on that link, you can read all about it. But what you see here, the dark blue line is meant to be an infinity symbol. I'll explain why in a second. So you see the student there. The student is clothed in self-determination. It's so important that students learn to know themselves and to be able to understand their strengths and their needs and to seek appropriate help. So the self-determined student, in their outstretched hand, you see a star. That's the student's vision, the student's post-secondary goals, we call it. That's our idiom in special education, the special language we call the student's vision is called post-secondary goals, PSG. And over on the other side, you can see that the student's vision for adult life has become real, has become big. That's the big star in those 4 domains of post-secondary success. So education and training, competitive employment, independent living, and community participation. While the student is at school, the student is supported by the whole school, by transition assessment, by the transition planning form, also known as the TPF, and the IEP, the individualized education program. Throughout the student's life, and that's why there's an infinity symbol, because it goes on without ending, the student is supported by the family, by community and adult services, and it will look different for each student. But the point being that all of us are interdependent. I'm not my own doctor. I don't grow my own food. All successful adults learn to appropriately depend on others, and our students need to learn that too. They need to learn to be as independent as possible, but also to seek help when they need it. And I think that my colleagues who are going to be speaking about life in college will also emphasize this point, how important it is for students to be self-determined when they're in college. Let me give you the 30,000-foot view of the IEP process. As I said, all I can do this evening is brief, but I hope it will be helpful. I mentioned age 14. The law says, the law in Massachusetts, the federal law is actually 16, but the law in Massachusetts says that students need to begin receiving transition services by age 14 or earlier if appropriate. So you could do it earlier. At age 14, the student must be invited to the IEP team meeting. That goes for all students. Every single student without exception must be invited to their own IEP meeting when they are 14. And at that point, after the invitation has been issued, hopefully there's a conversation with the student, with the family, with the educators about whether the student will participate, about how the student will participate for the whole meeting, for part of the meeting, how is this going to go? So it hopefully will not be a surprise to the student that they've been invited to their meeting. And hopefully that over time, students will develop the tools to fully participate in their IEP meetings as part of becoming a good self-advocate and in learning how to navigate their own education. So at the IEP team meeting, when the student is age 14 and onward, the team is going to be discussing the student's needs, strengths, preferences, and interests. Remember those words from IDEA? And also the student's desired outcomes in the post-secondary domain, and also the student's date, the date of the student's exit, the student's graduation. That's become a hot topic recently, and I'd be surprised if some questions don't come up later on that, on graduation. Okay, I want to emphasize again, I keep saying it, I hope I don't sound like a broken record. Self-determination is so important. We know from research that students who know themselves, who know their strengths, who know their needs, and who can seek appropriate help are the students who are going to grow up to be successful adults. If students lack these skills, and there are families that don't want to talk to their kids about the fact that they have disabilities, that's really not doing that child a service. Students need to know themselves, and they need to understand so that they can advocate for themselves in adult life, because parents won't be there forever. I know that's a tough message, but it's so important. So families can help students begin to understand and evaluate and express their strengths and challenges across environments to a variety of people. So these are all things that families can help with. There's a brochure about it. The big picture of the IEP process is in this slide. So it starts with assessment. All IEP meetings must rely on good assessment. Without good assessment, you don't have an IEP meeting that is going to be valuable. All right, so it starts with assessment in the strengths, needs, and preferences and interests of the student. And then at the very beginning of the IEP meeting, when the student is of transition age, you start with a transition planning form, and I'll discuss more about that. And then the rest of the IEP meeting is developing the IEP. That's the big picture. So let me talk about assessment. And here I hope that you will have a flashback to the very beginning and Dr. Waymeyer's phrase about closing that gap, because this is what assessment is about. Assessment is about finding out who is the student. So what are the student's needs and strengths? Who does the student want to be? What does the student want to do in adult life? The preferences and interests. And then what's the fit, right? That's the gap between the student and the requirements of their future life. So you want to close that gap as much as possible. You want to know the student fully now, and you want to have a process in which you continue to know the student as they develop new skills. These skills and strengths are going to prepare them for their eventual adult environment. That's really what transition assessment is about. It's not about asking questions for the sake of questions. It's about informing the education. I encourage you to think about have a transition frame of mind. Frequently, I hear that families will, say, oh my goodness, my child is 14 or 15 or 16 or whatever. It's time to request a transition assessment. Think about how to gather knowledge from all kinds of different places. Any assessment that is conducted when a student is between 14 and 22, you can see that as a transition assessment because it tells you about the student's vision. It tells you about their strengths, needs, preferences, and interests, and it helps measure progress toward the acquisition of skills. You can collect assessment data over a wide variety of settings. It doesn't just have to happen at school. It can happen at home, in the community, in the workplace, and the assessment can be done by the student, by you, the family, by teachers, friends, employers, coaches. Try to be expansive in your view of where you're getting information from and who is collecting the information. This is my favorite slide, even though it has so many words on it, so sorry about that, because it's really powerful. It has all the ideas in one place. So transition assessment is about those 4 adult domains, learning about the student in those domains. What information do we already have? The point being, if you already have the information, you don't need to go seek it. And that is the problem with sort of blanket requests for transition assessment, is that a lot of times I hear from school professionals, and I can see that they might go off spending a lot of time doing assessment to get answers to questions that are you already know the answers for. So what information do we already have? Start with that. What do we need to find out? And then do transition assessment. Not every student needs assessment in every domain. Let me tell you about an IEP that I read once. All over the IEP and over the student's records, this student wanted to work on tractor engines, farm equipment engines. This was his long-standing interest. He was very explicit about this. But what did I see in the assessment section of the IEP was that they said that he needed to have a career interest inventory. Why? I don't know why. It was very clear the student knew exactly what he wanted to do. So that wasn't something that was an appropriate assessment for him. He needed different kinds of assessments. So that's my point. Don't do assessments when you already have answers. Do assessments to get answers for things you don't know. What are the student's needs and strengths in each of those domains? What does the student want to be or do? What's the fit between the student right now and the adult life they want to have in the future? Families play a key role in assessment. It's not just the school's job. You know your child when your child is at home with you. They don't. And likewise, you don't know what the child's doing in school. You're not there. So together you can have one whole collection of information. So please work together with school folk to put together a complete picture of your child, and work with your child. Let your child take the lead. So let's move to the IEP process. The first thing to discuss at the transition meeting when the student is 14, is the transition planning form. This is a flexible brainstorming tool. It is a discussion guide. You should use it at the beginning of the IEP meeting when the student turns 14, and it guides the discussions of the team on transition planning. It helps the whole team think outside the box, and it informs the IEP development. It provides an action plan that anyone can implement. The student, the family, community members, adult agencies. It invites you to have a big vision and think big. Although it's a state mandated form, and this is very confusing to people, I know, nothing written on that form is required by law. Only what you take then from the transition planning form and put in the IEP becomes a legal contract. The transition planning form is a brainstorming document that allows you to think big. It is not a contract. All right, so then every time you have an IEP meeting during the transition years, use the previous TPF IEP and progress reports as a starting point. The top of the page of the transition planning form is where the student's vision goes. That is the student's vision alone, not anyone else's. And just a word about the words. The vision is called the post-secondary goal. That is not the same thing as an annual IEP goal. So those are 2 different concepts. One's the vision, one are the skills that the student's going to develop during the term of the IEP. Another word about vision is that I encourage you to help your child think big. One of my least favorite words in the world is realistic, because too often people with disabilities throughout history have been told that they can't, they shouldn't, they mustn't, they could never. These are not things we want to be telling our children. We want to be helping them to dream so that every morning they get out of bed with optimism. Because as Sonia Sotomayor says, you can't value dreams according to the odds of their coming true. Their real value is in stirring within us the will to aspire. I'm sure all of us can think of many dreams in our lives that did not come true, but boy, they helped us go forward in our lives. And that's the point of a vision. It doesn't need to be a realistic. We need to encourage our children to have hope. And then I should say, then we provide experiences through education through which the children will learn whether it actually was realistic or not. And then the team can have the conversation about what skills the student needs to develop in order to achieve that vision. And if the student hates the sight of blood and says they want to be a doctor, and you give them experiences volunteering in a hospital, they will learn very soon that that actually is not what they want to do. And that's just one example. So through experiences in education, students will figure it out with your support. IDA has a requirement for the post-secondary goals. On the IEP and the transition planning form, there needs to be one goal, one statement about what the student wants to do in further education and training. I want to go to a 2-year college. I want to go to Harvard, something about further education. I want to get a certificate in auto mechanics, right? The second thing that has to be there is a goal in the area of employment. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be an accountant. I want to be a hairdresser, etc. If appropriate, says IDEA, there should be another goal in the area of independent living. I want to live in an apartment with my friends. I want to live at home with my family forever because I love them so much. All right, so sorry, forgive my joking around. I dealt with that with my own son and had to help him learn that it might be nice to live elsewhere, not with us forever. So the team records the student's vision on the transition planning form, not anybody else's. And then the team should cut and paste that and put it in the vision section of the IEP. And then the team moves to, I'm going to go a little bit faster here, sorry. When the team completes the IEP, I'll get to that and talk about the vision again. I'm still in the transition planning form. At the bottom of page 1, you list the student's disability-related needs. You're not listing goals, you're just listing things that the student needs. This is not to imply or mean that this year the student's going to work on every one of these needs. Only what happens in what's in the IEP is contractual. This is a list of what the student needs, okay? It's not a contract. Then on the back, there's an action plan where everyone can have a role. So all the stakeholders in the student's life, including the student themselves. And as I said, the team discusses and completes the transition planning form. Before completing the IEP form, you cut and paste the vision into the IEP. Then the bottom of that page 1, the student's disability-related needs are used to inform annual goal development. So an annual IEP goal should focus on building skills that will make the biggest difference to the student during that one school year. Then each of the annual goals builds skills year over year to promote the realization of the student's vision, their post-secondary goals. So it's a stepwise process. That's why we begin at age 14, because it takes some time. Elements from the action plan can be put in the IEP, but don't necessarily have to be. As I said, the IEP is a legal contract spelling out what the district will do. It provides a roadmap so that the student can achieve their vision through the annual goals, through specially designed instruction and related services. Use the vision and the disability-related needs on the transition planning form to develop annual IEP goals. So you look at that vision and you look at the student's needs, and both of those are sources of information that lead to the development of goals and services. So again, what skills, strengths, interests, personal attributes, and accomplishments does the student currently have, right, that will contribute to their post-secondary success? And then given the student's disability-related needs, which is at the bottom of the page, what skills would the student need to acquire to achieve their vision for adult life? So the vision and the needs together end up as goals. They lead to the goals. I hope that's clear. We can address it more later if there's time. The team writes measurable annual goals and documents the services to support the student to gain needed skills. And that, at 7:25, oh, I'm proud of myself, is my very quick overview of transition. Here's my contact information. Call or email me anytime. I'm very, very happy to speak with you. Thanks so much. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Amanda. Our next speaker is Lori Andrescavage. Lori is an executive functioning college transition coach at Effective Effort Consulting. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Lori.
Thank you so much for having me. Let me share my screen. Let me see if you can see this. Are you seeing my slides? No. Let me try that again. Hold on. Thank you for your patience. I'm used to using Google Meet when I do college coaching. So hold on one moment as I try to share. Having some technical difficulties on my end.
Laurie, it popped up and then it disappeared. So you did do something right.
Okay, I did something right. Hold on one moment. I'm having a hard time.
There should be a green button on the bottom of your thing and it says share screen.
Yes. Oh, wait, here we go. Here we go. I'm good. I apologize. Thank you for your patience. Okay, we're on. We're good. People can see this.
Yes.
Okay, I apologize for that. So I work with a lot of students who are in college currently, and so they have experienced themselves firsthand this change, this transition from high school to college, and have been surprised by some of the changes and some of the skills that are needed. So we're going to cover a couple of those things and the questions that I hope to answer for you today. One, starting with, what are the changes that occur when transitioning from high school to college? What are some of the important things that are useful to know about what changes occur when you're thinking about a four-year college for your child? What are the skills needed for a four-year college specifically? We're going to focus on executive functioning skills, specifically time management and how to structure your time, because that is a huge shift that really can take students off guard because it's not something that they're used to doing in high school as much. And lastly, if you and your child are thinking that maybe four-year college right after high school isn't the next best step, there are other options out there. And so we will cover some of those. Okay, there we go. So this may be an obvious one, but the shift in responsibility is a big one. In high school, students are really used to having family members, parents supporting them in pretty much every day-to-day task that they need to do, from getting up to school in the morning to helping them and reminding them to get to sleep at night, helping them, reminding them, supporting them in completing their homework, getting their ADLs done, which are activities of daily living, which is making sure they're eating meals, making sure they're doing personal hygiene, making sure that they are getting their laundry cleaned. And then also reminders and helping students follow through on part-time jobs, getting to practice, things like that. And teachers and staff at school are also really involved and check in with students about things like missed assignments and missed classes. In college, that responsibility really shifts, especially if students are living away at a four-year college, to the student. And it's really on them what they do and what they don't do, including all of the things that I just listed. And there really are minimal, if any, external reminders. Time spent in class is also another really big shift. As you can see the visuals here, they're two very different looking schedules. In high school, students really are in back-to-back classes. Even their lunch times and break times and study hall times are structured, and they're in about 30 hours of class a week. And this significantly decreases in college. As you can see, this is actually a college student schedule. They are taking a reduced course load, so they are taking 3 classes here, but you can see the major gaps between classes. And if you're taking 4 to 5 classes, which is typically a full-time course load, you're in about 12 to 15 hours a week of class, which is half of what high school students are used to. And it's not back to back, depending on how you schedule it. There may be large gaps between classes. There may be a class heavy day. There may be a day you have just 1 class or even no classes. So that's a really big change as well for students to know. Okay. So work outside of class time, this significantly goes up in college. In high school, it really does vary. school to school and state to state, but what is different is that students have usually built-in study hall times during their day to get work done. They've got the family and parent support at home to help remind them to follow through with homework and assignments. And teachers will remind students of upcoming deadlines and will check in about late assignments. So there's a lot of more adult involvement in that schoolwork for the student. And in college, the amount of workload goes up. You should expect that for every hour of class that you have, you should be doing 2 to 3 hours of work outside of your college class to keep up with that coursework. And professors really expect you to rely on syllabi and on the online learning management systems that a lot of colleges are using these days, like Canvas and Blackboard, to keep track of deadlines and dates. There can be really minimal reminders from professors. I've had a couple of college students who have been surprised the day of walking into class that something was due or that a quiz was given. They were expecting the professor to remind them. They didn't. It was on the syllabus that they hadn't checked. So that can be a big change that students aren't aware of. Advocacy is the next big change. So in high school, again, adults in students' lives are way more involved and can help to speak on behalf a lot of times for the student. Parents and guardians are more involved in teacher contact. They're attending those yearly IEP meetings and maybe those intermittent progress meetings and speaking up in those students, sometimes on behalf of their children. And then again, teachers and staff will be reaching out if they're noticing that a student is struggling, if they're missing things, if they're not attending classes. A lot of the times the adults will be reaching out to those students. And in college, that shifts, that advocacy piece shifts to the student. Professors most likely won't be reaching out to you if you miss a class or miss an assignment. Students are really expected to speak up on behalf of themselves, reaching out to professors if they do end up missing a class and following up to find out what they've missed, checking in during office hours if they need clarity on assignments or expectations. Students are the ones who, if they are struggling academically, to find those resources and tutoring centers on campus and pursuing accommodations to be put in place that I'll talk about in the next slide. But it's really on the student to be aware of when they may need the help and seek out those supports. And there's something called FERPA, which you may have heard of. It's the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And in college, that really means that all academic information is between the student and the college. It really protects college students' education records. And so parents, even if you are footing that expensive bill, you really won't know how your student is doing unless, one, they sign a waiver so you can have access to that information, or two, if your child is letting you know how they're doing and if they're struggling. And so students really need to, in college, be able to speak up to the supports and the adults on the college campus, as well as their parents at home if they are having a hard time and need more support. And the last main change that I'll talk about here is the accommodations process. So as Amanda just talked about in great detail, in high school, there's the IDEA and the Section 504 of the Rehab Act, a certain subpart that is in play. And that can mean that your child may be on an IEP with accommodations or specialized instruction. And not only is the student involved, but lots of other people are involved. Parents and guardians, the district, the school. The district helps provide the evaluation that informs the IEP and the goals that go on there. A lot of students don't realize that once that diploma is received, once you graduate and that diploma is in hand, the IEP is no longer in play because the IDEA no longer covers them. So the IEP does not transfer to a college setting. The laws change over to the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, and a different subpart of Section 504 of the Rehab Act. Even though the IEP doesn't transfer, there is still a process for applying for accommodations, not modifications. And it's really on the student to initiate that process, to follow through on that process, to provide the necessary documentation that informs the accommodations that you are requesting. I'm not going to go into any further detail. I know Vikky is going to speak next more about the accommodation process and also about what accommodations versus modifications mean. Okay, so we talked about some of the main changes. Given those changes, what are some of the skills that are needed for college? So one big one that I'm going to get to in the coming slides is time management. Again, there's so much time and things that need to be structured day to day that a student isn't used to doing. And this can be one of the biggest challenges for students as they make the transition. So we're going to get into some strategies that have helped students, at least in our line of coaching at EEC. So we'll move on to metacognition at this point. So metacognition really is the ability to be able to think about your thinking, knowing your diagnoses and how do they impact your learning, understanding what your strengths are as a student and being able to lean on those. And then knowing what your challenges are and what can help support your challenges so you can be successful on a college campus. And knowing about your learning, being able to think about your thinking can really help inform your advocacy and communication on campus, being able to know yourself as a student and as a learner, and then being able to recognize and speak up when you need that help. And again, that might be reaching out to a professor through email or through office hours and asking for clarity on assignments and expectations. It may mean attending tutoring or writing centers for additional academic support. It may be going through that accommodation process and getting some things in place that you might need. Or it might even mean accessing the therapeutic supports on campus if that's what you're needing at that time. Next is impulse control. There's so many exciting temptations and fun things on a college campus that may seem more fun than attending class or doing work. So this is a really important skill to be able to resist some of those impulses, be able to prioritize what's important, being able to do the things that you need to do first before maybe later indulging in some of those funner aspects of college. And then task initiation, follow through, and motivation, all really important skills to have. This really just means being able to start a task, being able to start an assignment, being able to follow through and sustain motivation to see that assignment through its completion. And this can also apply to areas outside of academics. Again, those day-to-day skills, the things that you need to accomplish, being able to start and follow through on doing your laundry, some of the things that maybe you haven't done before when you were in high school. Stress management is another big skill that is really important, and it can be really helpful for students to have kind of a cope ahead plan when they start to think about entering college, anticipating what is it that may be stressful. That can be really different student to student. So having a sense of what that stress, when that stress may occur, what does that stress look like or feel like for you? And what are some of the coping strategies that you could implement on a college campus? And again, that really varies. It's very individualized. But for some, it might mean exercise. For others, it might mean mindfulness and meditation. And others, it might mean doing some talk therapy. And then lastly, this may also be an obvious one, but academic skills. Is your child able to write a paper? Can they take good notes? Are they able to effectively study? There are a couple of great surveys online. Landmark is one. Landmark, you may be familiar with. It's a college in Vermont specifically for students with learning disabilities, ADHD, and those who are on the autism spectrum. And this is a short survey that they've put out to assess college readiness. The Lassie scale is another great scale that you can use. It's much more detailed, but both really assess these skills here. And they can be helpful to take them and have your child understand what their strengths are and maybe what their challenges are and what they may need support with. Okay, moving on to time management. So this pie chart is just a good visual to give you a sense of how much free time your child will have in a week. A colleague of mine did the math and assumed that if a student sleeps 9 hours a day, which is ideal, maybe not so realistic in college, but we're going with 9 hours. That leaves 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's 105 waking hours in a week. And if you're taking 4 to 5 classes, which is approximately 15 hours, that leaves 90 hours of free time that need to be scheduled in, that a student isn't used to scheduling in. And I'm not going to list all the things on the right-hand side, but you can see that there are many things in addition to studying and assignment completion that needs to go into scheduling. So how do you manage all of this time? So this is a systematic approach we use in the coaching field. at EEC to help students to really find a way to organize themselves and to develop good routines and habits that help them to be successful in college. And it's really helpful if this can happen at the start, ideally, of the semester to really set the student up for success. So the first thing is really identifying and establishing a system that works for you. And again, this is very individualized. Some students really like the pen and paper daily, weekly planner. Other students really find online calendars useful, myself included. They have lots of reminders and notifications. You can color code them. They're really easy to organize and help keep track of things. Some students like a nice big wall calendar on their dorm room, and some students like a combination of these things. But I think finding a system that maybe has historically worked for you, or that the student is willing to use and try, is a helpful starting point. The next thing is knowing what your classes are. What are you taking and when are you taking them? Where are they on campus? And plugging those classes into that calendar or organizational system you're using, and having a plan to get those materials that you need when classes get started. From there, looking at each syllabus for each class is extremely helpful. Having a sense of what the expectations are. How is the class graded? What kind of assignments will you be having? Is it a reading heavy class? Is it a paper heavy class? How much weight is each assignment given? And when are professors' office hours? Those syllabi will really help you to create a big picture of the semester, create an overview of what is to come in the coming weeks and months. And it's really helpful if that student can then take each syllabus and plug in each and every deadline and due date. And this can feel tedious, but it can really be helpful so the student can know week to week, month to month for the entire semester what is coming up, and adding in also those office hours, because that will be a useful resource to the student in those coming weeks. And then from there, plugging in and creating a weekly schedule, adding in any appointments you may have, meetings, extracurriculars, adding in those meal times, even the exercise times and times when you plan to sleep, because having that visual will then will allow you to see where in your schedule do you have space to then plug in times that you plan to study. So then plugging in those study times, those blocks of time, and it's helpful to add in when and where you plan to do so, because that can increase your chance of following through on studying during those times. So again, this is a very systematic approach of kind of organizing yourself and developing routines. Elizabeth Hamlet does something very similar. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she is an expert in the field of transition from high school to college with students with learning disabilities. She's got a great book on it. She's got a great website. She does something similar where she's got this scheduling grid where she encourages students to plug in all the information that I went through into this. And this can be really helpful for students who use pen and paper and can visually see and block off times. And this is actually a current client of one of my colleagues. And it took her several months to get to this point of kind of trial and error and trying different things to find a system that worked for her. Unfortunately, we can't see it, but she's had it color coded on her end, so it's only appearing as all purple on our end, but she's really laid out all the things in her weekly schedule, and you can see it for yourself. The classes she plans to attend, the specific assignments she plans to work on, meeting times, appointment times, times she plans to work out. So this is a really great visual of an effective use of a calendar for a specific student. Okay, so moving on to what other post-secondary options are there besides four-year college? There are other options. And the first one that I think is a great choice is community college. It is an easier transition because your student will be living at home, so they'll get that college and academic experience, but it won't be that huge jump to living on their own independently. And so the transition is a bit easier. You are accepted if you complete a short application and have proof that you are graduating high school or have a GED, with the exception that there are certain programs like nursing programs that there's additional criteria that you should pay attention to. But in general, you apply, you get in if you've graduated high school or have that GED. It's cheaper. You can take one class, you can take a full course load. And then in Massachusetts, there's something called the mass transfer, which is when you get an associate's degree at a college, community college with a B average or greater, you are guaranteed admission to Massachusetts state schools and UMass schools. So that's a really helpful thing to know as students are considering community college as a possible option. I'm sure you've heard about gap years. It's increasing in popularity over the years, and it really is an intentional break, with the break being a plan to focus on exploration of skills, exploration of possible careers, of possible academic paths, and it can really vary. It can be something you create yourself. I had a student last semester who put their own gap year together. They took a couple of baking classes. They worked part-time at a daycare. So they created their own gap year, but then there are other structured or semi-structured programs out there as well that provide housing, meals, some mentoring groups, some travel at some of these programs. So that's another great option to consider if your student really doesn't have a good sense of what they want to do and want to build those skills and have a more focused direction on learning about other careers and other options. Then there's vocational programs and certificates you can get. This is also known as trade schools, and they're actually offered at a lot of community colleges. They're usually 1 or 2 years of more career-focused training, and they're typically in areas like technology, cosmetology, health, things like that. There's something called PG or postgraduate years, and this is really an additional academic year following high school graduation, and it's at an independent or private school. So for the student who may be lacking in some academic skills and needs to build up those areas, this would be a good option for them, because it's really, the focus is on academic growth. And work part-time, full-time, and military are other options as well. In addition to that, there are resources out there that you may be familiar with already. This is not a comprehensive list. For a more comprehensive list, there's a link at the bottom here. But these are state agency resources that can help supplement whatever your child ends up doing next. There's MRC, Mass Rehab Commission, for those with physical, psychiatric, and learning diagnoses, and there's a lot of vocational supports that they offer. I also believe that they offer some financial assistance for students who end up pursuing community college or state school, so that's also really helpful to know. But they really help support students in identifying their goals and helping them support them in what they need to achieve those goals. Department of Mental Health, DMH, is for those with severe and persistent cases of mental illness, and that's a lot of, they offer a lot of mental health supports in the community. They offer case management. There are clubhouses that offer and provide some skill development in areas like independent living. And then there's the Department of Developmental Services for those with developmental and intellectual diagnoses, including the autism spectrum. And that can range from day program supports, other employment supports, supports in the community, and supports for family. Okay. Lots of resources. I think it's being sent into the chat. A lot of resources on the transition, a lot of resources on state agencies, college readiness, and other post-secondary options. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lori. And we've gotten a lot of information so far, a lot of slides, and a lot of resources. As I said before, we are recording the presentation, and it will be available on our website. So if anything went by too fast or you want to look at it again, you will have access to that. And all of the resources that are on the slides and are being put in the chat, I will email out to everyone that is registered for this event. Our next speaker is Vikky Angelico. Vikky is the Disability Services Coordinator at Framingham State University. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Vikky.
You're on mute, Vikky.
Thank you. So I'll say again, my name is Vikky Angelico. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Disability Access Services Coordinator at Framingham State University. So what I'll be speaking about is not unique to Framingham State in terms of accessing academic accommodations at the college level, but I will be speaking mostly from my experience at Framingham State. I'll also say that I'm an alum twice over. I graduated with a degree in English in 2007. And then I actually graduated with my master's in the counseling psych program a couple of years ago. So I'm going to share my screen, my presentation. I have fewer slides, but that also means I'll be doing more talking, so I apologize in advance. As I said, my name is Vikky. In my role as Disability Access Services Coordinator and as other people in similar positions at other state universities, at the community colleges, and at private colleges, I collect students' documentation that's pertinent to their disability. So that means their neuropsychological testing, any medical documentation for a medical-based disability, information from a therapist or psychiatrist for mental health diagnoses or ADD, ADHD. And once that documentation is received and we've had time to review it, we enter into an interactive process, meaning we meet individually with each student and a lot of the time their home support team, so parents, aunts, uncles, guardians, and discuss their accommodations. So as Amanda and Lori both talked about, the transition from high school to college means a student is no longer on an IEP. The student is expected to be the person driving their academic success, but we realize that they might need a little support. They may still need a backseat driver for a little bit. So that's why we invite parents or others to come to that intake meeting so that we can discuss accommodations, but still have that support from parents. We often say that you're not on an IEP anymore, but this is the closest thing you're going to get to an IEP meeting, because we really do talk about specifics to that student. So their individual learning style, their challenges, their strengths, their likes and their dislikes as they relate to school and study style. We do spend a lot of time talking about what's the best way for you to keep track of things. Pen and paper may work great for some students and it may be terrible for others, as Lori kind of mentioned, finding that good balance that's going to help keep you accountable. I want to spend just a minute really emphasizing the difference between modifications that occur in the K through 12 level and accommodations that happen in higher education, community college, public and private institutions. So the IDEA allows for some modification to the curriculum. So we talked about maybe fewer questions on an exam, fewer pages, as long as the student is demonstrating understanding, maybe not being called on to read in class, or maybe being pulled for instruction in a specific subject. Those are all modifications to the K-12 curriculum that happen at the K through 12 level. What happens in college when the law changes from IDEA to the ADA is accommodating the student's disability. So my office and other disability access services offices exist to remove barriers to ensure access. That doesn't mean that the overall expectations of the student is going to be changed or modified. So an example I use often is for students who have anxiety around public speaking or around presentations. And I'm not talking about just, the butterflies in the belly when you have to speak. Like, I'll be honest, I'm feeling a little nervous right now. That is a relatively normal amount of anxiety. I'm talking about clinical anxiety that really makes it not possible for students to present in class. Well, it wouldn't be considered an appropriate accommodation for a student taking a speech class or an acting class to not have to speak in front of a group of people, right? Because that is going to fundamentally alter the course and fundamentally change the learning outcomes that the course has been structured to get from the student. So when I meet with students, generally in the summer before classes start, we really talk about the difference between what was expected and what might change in high school versus what can and can't change in college. And sometimes that's a conversation that needs to be had a couple times during the semester, because it can be a real surprise when you're expected or your child is expected to do all of that reading in one night or 1 week, or to really spend time crafting a 6-page essay when usually they were expected to produce 2 or 3 pages that still met the criteria. So one thing that I will mention as a good way to start preparing for college now is to kind of reduce the modifications in the IEP, or keep the modifications in the IEP, but try to access them less. So you do still have that safety net in place, but you are pushing yourself, pushing your child to do that, that work that's going to be expected at the college level. Having said that, there are a lot of accommodations that students receive at the college level that are very similar to the accommodations they may be getting now in high school. So very typical accommodations include, as you can see here, extended time for assessments. That means quizzes, exams, obviously SAT, if you're experiencing that now, a reduced distraction environment for assessments. So at Framingham State, we have within the Center for Academic Success and Achievement, we have a testing room. So students with disabilities will most often come physically to our building to take their quiz or exam away from the rest of the class. Other accommodations are alternative format tests or textbooks in an audio format. So a student can listen to the question being asked or can listen to their reading instead of simply reading it on the page. We do some course substitutions and waivers based on pretty specific criteria for a math-based or a language-based disability. Assistance with note-taking is a very common accommodation and service that we offer, wherein a student would still be expected to go to class, still be expected to take their own notes, but they would have access to another set of notes, often the professors, but also occasionally another students, to kind of look on and help develop their note-taking skills, but also fill in the blanks. And at the bottom, you can note that accommodations should not fundamentally alter the nature of the course or program. So all of that can be kind of jarring when a student is used to a lot of support, but that's where these additional services come into play. And I realize that I'm short on time, so I will mention more broadly to when you're doing college research, if you think a four-year institution is for you, in addition to looking at their Disability Access Services office, look at what their academic tutoring support is like. At Framingham State, we offer math tutoring, writing tutoring, subject tutoring in biology, chemistry, history, foreign languages, a lot of subject-based tutoring. We also offer the opportunity to meet with academic coaches or student mentors as a check-in. And that's available to all students, but we really recommend it for students with disabilities and students who are used to having a skills period or a guidance counselor that they're checking in with regularly. So a lot of supports that may have appeared on a student's IEP may not appear on an academic accommodation plan at the college level, but the supports are still available in kind of a different configuration. So in addition to doing the research around disability services, it's also really helpful to get a sense of what other kind of support is available on campus. Lori also mentioned, in addition to the tutoring supports, counseling and group support services as well. I'm gonna leave my email up here for just a minute. and questions I think are going to come shortly. But I am always happy to answer questions from prospective students and prospective parents. I always couch it saying, like, please don't expect an immediate answer, because we are working with the students that are currently enrolled, but we do like to answer questions whenever possible, because this is definitely a big decision and there's a lot of factors that go into choosing a college, especially when you have a student with a disability. So if there are any questions that you want to address to me at the end, I'd be happy to do that, or you can just email me directly. Thanks.
Thank you, Vikky. I'm going to shut the recording off now.